All right, welcome back. Let's begin. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
I walked into my parents' 30th anniversary dinner still smelling like the motor pool. The restaurant sat 10 minutes outside Fort Liberty, all glass walls, white tablecloths, and a valet who looked personally offended by the dust on my truck. I had just come off a long field inspection. My boots were scuffed, stained with red Carolina dirt, and a little cracked around the toes. I wiped them once on the curb before heading in. That was the best they were going to look. Inside, the place was glowing. Candles, soft music, waiters, moving like they were on rails. My mother had insisted on elegant. My father had nodded like it was a briefing he couldn't escape. And then there was Felicia. She stood near the center table like she'd been staged there. Dress uniform pressed sharp enough to cut paper. Brass polished. Hair pulled tight and perfect. Her boots looked like black mirrors. If you leaned close enough, you could probably see your own insecurities staring back at you. She spotted me before I even reached the table. Her eyes dropped straight to my feet. I kept walking. "Cassie," she said, loudly, smiling the way people do when they're about to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. "You came straight from wherever that is?" A couple of her friends from base turned to look. I recognized one of them from a public affairs event. Derek, her boyfriend, stood at her side in a fitted blazer, already holding a glass of something expensive. I pulled out a chair. "Hi to you too." Felicia tilted her head. "Did you even try?" "I mean, look at your boots." There it was. I glanced down. They were worn, no argument there. The leather had lines from years of kneeling on concrete floors, climbing in and out of vehicles, walking ranges in heat that baked the ground solid. "They weren't pretty. They're fine," I said. She laughed. Not a big laugh. A precise one. Designed. "Fine." She turned to Derek. "She works logistics. You'd think she'd at least know how to maintain her own equipment." Derek gave a polite smile, the kind civilians use when they don't want to get involved in military sibling dynamics. Felicia looked back at me, voice just loud enough for the table behind us. "You look like you forgot how to polish yourself. Those boots look like trash, Cassie. They lower the standard of this family." I let that sit in the air. My mother stared down at her plate. My father adjusted his napkin like it required strategic planning. No one corrected her. No one told her to knock it off. That part didn't surprise me. Felicia had been the pride project since high school. Perfect grades. West Point acceptance. Commissioned as a second lieutenant on schedule. Public affairs branch. Always photographed. Always quoted. Always visible. I took a sip of water. "Happy anniversary, Mom." "Dad." My father cleared his throat. "Good to see you made it." That was as close to approval as I was getting tonight. Felicia smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her sleeve. "You know, image matters in the Army. It's not just about pushing papers in a back office." I almost smiled at that. She loved to call it pushing papers. She had no idea what moved through those papers, or who signed them. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. Derek leaned forward. "So what exactly do you do, Cassie?" Felicia answered before I could. "Inventory, supply chains, counting things. Very important if you're into spreadsheets." Her friends chuckled. I looked at Derek. "I manage assets." He nodded like that cleared everything up. Dinner was served. Steak asparagus, something drizzled with a sauce that probably had a French name. Felicia posted a photo before taking a bite. I saw her angle the shot carefully so her uniform sleeve and rank were visible. She kept glancing at my boots like they were an unsolved problem. Halfway through the meal, she leaned closer. "You know, Fort Sterling just opened a new communications slot. High visibility, strategic exposure. That's where real careers are built." "Congratulations," I said. "Sounds competitive." "Oh, it is," she replied, smiling. "But they're not looking for people who hide in warehouses." There it was again, the warehouse. She had built an entire narrative about my career without ever asking a single real question. My mother finally spoke. "Felicia's on track for captain early." Felicia gave a modest shrug that fooled no one. "If the board sees what I've been doing, it's likely." I cut into my steak. "That's great." She studied me like she was waiting for jealousy. I didn't give her any. Instead, I looked around the table. Her friends were engaged. Derek was impressed. My parents were glowing. This was the version of the family story they preferred. One daughter shining, the other functional. Felicia tapped her fork against her plate. "You could have gone to West Point too, you know, if you'd wanted." That one was intentional. I met her eyes. I remember. She held my gaze for a second too long, then she smiled again. Well, not everyone is cut out for the spotlight. I didn't respond. Because here's the thing about spotlights, they're bright, but they're also narrow. The rest of dinner moved on to stories about her last media campaign. She described standing beside a brigadier general during a press event. She mentioned her follower count twice. Derek asked about promotion timelines. My parents listened like investors reviewing strong returns. No one asked about my week. At one point, Felicia excused herself to take a call. She stepped outside, posture straight, voice crisp. Even through the glass, I could see her practicing command presence. When she came back, she looked energized. That was my CO, she announced. There's talk of a transfer. Fort Sterling. She let that land like an award. Derek raised his brows. That's a big deal, right? It's elite, she said. They only move their best people there. Her eyes flicked to me. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin. Then I'm sure you'll fit right in, she laughed softly. You wouldn't last a week there. I looked down at my boots again. They were scuffed, yes. Scratched from years of real ground. They had been through inspections that weren't public. Through audits that didn't trend online. Through operations that didn't come with applause. They weren't shiny, they were solid. Felicia leaned back in her chair. Maybe one day you'll understand what it means to represent something bigger than yourself. I almost told her. Almost. Instead, I stood when the check arrived. I hugged my mother. I shook my father's hand. Derek gave me a firm evaluative grip, like he was measuring potential. Felicia air-kissed my cheek. Try a little polish next time, she whispered. I walked out into the warm night air without answering. My boots hit the pavement with a steady rhythm as I crossed the parking lot. The valet hesitated before handing me my keys, probably wondering how someone dressed like me had eaten inside. I didn't explain. As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. No shine, no spotlight, just me. And that was enough. I kept my hand steady on the steering wheel, but my mind went straight back 12 years. West Point had sent 2 acceptance letters to our house that spring. Mine came first. Felicia's came 3 days later. She screamed when she opened hers. My mom cried. My dad stood in the kitchen holding both envelopes like he'd just won something he couldn't afford. 2 weeks later, he fell off a scaffolding at work. It wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no heroic music. Just a bad step, a hard landing, and a spinal injury that put him flat on his back for months. Workers' comp dragged its feet. Bills didn't. Someone had to stay. Felicia sat at the edge of his hospital bed one night and said, I can't give this up. I've worked my whole life for this. She didn't look at me when she said it. I looked at my dad. He looked tired, smaller than I'd ever seen him. I'll defer, I said. West Point doesn't do deferrals for family logistics. Not like that. I knew it when I made the call. I withdrew instead. Felicia left that summer with 2 suitcases and a framed copy of her acceptance letter. I stayed home. I drove Dad to physical therapy. I handled insurance calls. I picked up extra shifts. I learned more about paperwork than any 18-year-old should. No one threw me a going-away party. After Dad stabilized and could walk short distances again, I enlisted. No academy, no ceremony, just a recruiter's office and a contract. Private Cassie Hayes, E1. Basic was simple compared to what I'd already handled. Orders made sense. Effort equaled progress. Nobody cared about your last name. I didn't go into public affairs. I didn't go anywhere visible. I tested high, kept my head down, and got pulled into logistics. Then from logistics into something more specific. Strategic assets. That's what the paperwork called it. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't public. It involved inventory that didn't exist on normal rosters and budgets that didn't get discussed in open meetings. It required accuracy, discretion, patience. I was good at it. I made sergeant, then staff sergeant. I went to OCS later quietly, earned my commission without a parade. No social media posts, no glossy photos. While I was building a record, Felicia was building a brand. Every few months, I'd see a new photo online. Felicia next to a general, Felicia at a podium, Felicia on base with a caption about leadership and impact. My parents printed those photos and framed them. They didn't frame my promotion certificates. Money started moving around the same time her follower count did. At first it was small. Mom, I just need a short-term loan until my housing allowance catches up. Or Dad, I'm investing in a professional development conference. It'll pay off. It always sounded reasonable. Then she called me. Hey, she said one night. I'm between reimbursements. Can I borrow $5,000 just until next quarter? I had savings. Hazard pay adds up when you don't spend it. What's it for? I asked. Image management, she replied. Uniform upgrades. Networking trips. You wouldn't get it. That part was true. I transferred the money. She paid back half. Over the next few years, the amounts got bigger. 10,000, 15, always temporary. Always tied to some opportunity that was just about to explode her career forward. I stopped asking what it was for. I started tracking it. Strategic assets teaches you to follow numbers the way other people follow gossip. Patterns show up fast if you're looking. Felicia wasn't just borrowing, she was stacking. Credit cards, personal loans, private lenders, all under the assumption that her next promotion would solve everything. She lived in upgraded apartments near base, drove a leased SUV she didn't need, hosted dinners for officers' spouses she barely liked. My parents never questioned it. She's investing in her future, my mother would say. One afternoon, I stopped by their house unannounced. The mailbox was stuffed with envelopes stamped "Final Notice." I pulled 3 out before walking inside. Dad was at the table staring at a spreadsheet printed from an old desktop computer. Mom was pacing. What's going on? I asked. They froze. Nothing, Mom said too quickly. I laid the envelopes down. This doesn't look like nothing, Dad sighed. Felicia just needed some help bridging a gap. How big a gap? He didn't answer. I already had a guess. That night, I logged into the joint emergency savings account I'd set up years earlier for them. The one I contributed to monthly. It was almost empty. I hadn't authorized any withdrawals. I called the bank. Felicia had access. My parents had added her during one of Dad's hospital recovery periods, saying it was for convenience. Convenience had cost 6 figures over time. I drove to her apartment the next weekend. She opened the door in workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. You can't just show up, she said. I just did. She rolled her eyes but stepped aside. The place looked staged. Designer furniture, smart lighting, a wall-mounted TV big enough to host a briefing on. How much are you in? I asked. She crossed her arms. That's none of your business. It became my business when you drained Mom and Dad's account. She didn't flinch. I'm building something. Once I make captain, this all evens out. That's not how math works. She walked to the kitchen island and poured herself sparkling water. You don't understand how careers work at my level. I let that pass. Did you take out a home equity loan on their house? I asked. That made her pause. Where did you hear that? So you did. It's temporary, she snapped. A short-term investment opportunity, high return, a defense tech startup with inside positioning. Who told you that? People who actually move in important circles. I stepped closer. Did you read the contract? Of course I did. You read it carefully. Her jaw tightened. I had already looked into the company name she mentioned. No federal contracts, no verified deliverables. Just a website and a promise. You put the house up as collateral, I said. Without telling them. I had power of attorney for financial matters, she shot back. Dad signed it years ago. Dad signed it while on pain medication after surgery. You're gambling their house on a promotion that hasn't happened yet. She leaned in, eyes sharp. I am not some reckless kid. I know what I'm doing, and when this pays off, you'll thank me. I shook my head. You're not investing. You're covering holes with more holes. She laughed. Spoken like someone who counts boxes for a living. That's when I realized something. She truly believed she was untouchable. She believed her trajectory was guaranteed. That rank would rise on schedule. That visibility meant protection. That image meant value. She had no idea how fast things could shift when the wrong eyes started looking. I left her apartment without arguing further. In my truck, I pulled up property records. The lien was real. If the startup failed, and every indicator said it would, the bank wouldn't negotiate feelings. They'd take the house. And my parents would lose the only stable thing they had left. I stared at the numbers for a long minute. Then I made a decision. If Felicia wanted to gamble, she could gamble with her own future, not theirs. I submitted a formal inquiry the next morning, not about my sister, not directly. I requested a compliance review tied to irregular asset movement flagged under a regional audit. I used the proper channels, no emotion, no family notes, just data. Fort Sterling had already been on my radar for months. Officially, it was a restricted operations base. Low public profile, limited external communication. Unofficially, it handled sensitive asset control and internal investigations. When numbers didn't add up across multiple installations, Fort Sterling was where they landed, including numbers like the ones I just traced. 3 weeks later, an internal memo crossed my secure inbox. Communications Division reassignment. Fort Sterling, incoming personnel list attached. Felicia Hayes. I leaned back in my chair and read it twice. She didn't request that transfer. It came down as an operational need, public affairs support for strategic narrative restructuring. That's what the memo called it. She called me that night before I had a chance to call her. "You're not going to believe this," she said, breathless. "I might. I got selected for Fort Sterling." I let a small pause stretch. "That's impressive." "It's more than impressive," she said. "It's elite. They don't send average officers there. I'm aware." She didn't catch that. "This is what I've been working for," she continued. "High-level operations, direct exposure to command. This is Captain Track territory." I swiveled slightly in my office chair, staring at the wall, where a map of regional installations hung. Fort Sterling was marked in a simple black dot, no fanfare. "When do you report?" I asked. 30 days, that's fast. They move quickly when you're valuable." There it was again, valuable. She had no idea how that word functioned at Fort Sterling. 2 nights later, she insisted we meet for coffee. She showed up in civilian clothes but carried herself like she was already being photographed. She sat down across from me and placed her phone face up on the table. Notifications kept lighting up the screen. "I've already had 3 senior officers congratulate me," she said. "They know what this means." "And what does it mean?" I asked. She smiled. "It means I'm stepping into rooms you'll never even see." I took a sip of black coffee. "That's so." She nodded. "Let's be honest, Cassie. You're solid, dependable, but you chose the safe path. Back office, paper trails, support roles." I almost corrected her. Almost. She leaned forward. "You'll probably retire comfortably as a mid-level officer. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone is meant for high command." I set my cup down. "You think Fort Sterling is about visibility?" "It's about influence," she said. "Policy, strategy, access." "It's about scrutiny," I replied. She waved that off. "Only if you have something to hide." Her confidence would have been impressive if it wasn't built on assumptions. "You'll still be in that counting office, right?" she asked. "Inventory management, something like that." She shook her head lightly. "I don't know how you do it. 12 years and you're still buried in paperwork." 12 years, she said it like I'd been stuck. She didn't know those 12 years included deployments she never heard about, investigations she'd never read about, decisions signed in rooms without windows, but she liked her version better. "I'll send you pictures," she added, "when I'm on base, just so you can see what real command looks like." I nodded once. "I'm sure I'll recognize it." She grinned. "You won't. It's on another level." She wasn't wrong about that. Fort Sterling wasn't glamorous. It didn't advertise. There were no welcome banners. The base ran quiet, tight, and controlled. Personnel were screened twice. Financial disclosures were reviewed automatically upon arrival. Every transfer triggered a background audit, including hers. Back at my office, I pulled up the pre-clearance file attached to her reassignment. Debt-to-income ratio flagged. Outstanding private loans flagged. Pending lien against parental property flagged. She hadn't realized the system recalculated everything once a soldier crossed into restricted operations. Public affairs officers were usually vetted for messaging risk. At Fort Sterling, the vetting went deeper. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. 2 weeks before her move date, she called again. "Can you believe this?" she said, irritated now. "What happened? They're requesting updated financial disclosures, like detailed ones, down to personal investments. That's standard for certain posts. It's excessive," she snapped. "I've already submitted general statements. They want specifics." She sighed loudly. "It's just bureaucracy. I'll handle it." I didn't respond. Because bureaucracy in the right hands is precision. The day her official orders published, she posted about it online. A carefully worded caption about leadership responsibility and stepping into greater impact. She didn't mention the audit notice that came with the transfer packet. At my end, a separate order arrived. Reassignment confirmation, command authority extension for Fort Sterling Regional Oversight. Effective immediately. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce it. I signed the acknowledgement and went back to reviewing a procurement irregularity in another state. Felicia texted me a photo of her packed boxes the night before she left. Next stop, the big leagues. I typed back, "Drive safe." She added one more message. You'll probably never see the inside of this base. I looked around my office. I'd been seeing the inside of it for months, but some doors don't need to be advertised. They just need the right clearance. I signed out a reflective vest and grabbed a clipboard before heading to the storage yard. Fort Sterling doesn't roll out welcome banners. New arrivals check in at a low concrete building with no signage beyond a unit number. The real work happens behind secured gates in places that look ordinary on purpose. That morning, I was reviewing container seals tied to a flagged shipment. Old metal boxes lined up in rows, dusty, sun-faded numbers. Nothing about it screamed importance. That's why it worked. I heard the SUV before I saw it. Engine too smooth for government issue. Felicia stepped out like she was arriving at a press conference, dress uniform sharp, boots polished to the point of distraction, sunglasses on, phone in hand. She took 2 steps toward the admin building, then stopped. Her eyes locked on me. I was kneeling beside a container gloves on checking a serial tag. She blinked once like her brain needed a second to process it. Cassie, I stood up slowly and pulled off one glove. Morning, she looked around then back at me. What are you doing here working? She scanned my vest, the gloves, the clipboard. You got transferred too in a way. She let out a short laugh. Wow, they really did push you all the way down. I didn't respond. She walked closer, heels clicking against the pavement. So this is where they stick the paper pusher's inventory cleanup. I adjusted the clipboard under my arm. We all start somewhere. She shook her head. No, this isn't starting. This is ending. A young specialist approached to direct her to in-processing. He glanced at me briefly, then looked at her name tape. Lieutenant Hayes, he asked. Yes, she said, posture snapping into place. Public affairs. He nodded. You'll need to report to Building 3 after she cut him off with a raised hand. I know the protocol. He stepped back, unsure. She turned to me again. Please tell me you're not assigned anywhere near my section. I'm assigned where I need to be. She smirked. Right. Her eyes dropped to the container behind me. So what exactly do you do? Count scrap metal, verify chain of custody. She waved that off. You always loved sounding important. She popped her trunk open. 2 large suitcases, a garment bag, a hard case for electronics. She pointed at them. Help me with these. I looked at the luggage, then back at her. You've got hands. She lowered her voice. Don't make this awkward. I'm about to meet the commanding officer. I can't be dragging bags across a yard. That sounds inconvenient. Her jaw tightened. I outrank you. That part was technically true on visible insignia. I'm a first lieutenant, she continued. If I give you a lawful order, you follow it. The specialist nearby shifted uncomfortably. Is that what this is? I asked evenly. A lawful order. Her eyes narrowed. Don't push me. I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then I walked to the trunk and lifted one suitcase. It was heavier than it needed to be. She smiled, slightly satisfied. See, not that hard. I picked up the second bag and started walking toward temporary lodging. She followed, talking the entire time. This base is different, she said. High-level operations. I've already been told I'll be briefed directly by senior command. That's efficient. You wouldn't understand the pace here, she added. It's not about boxes, it's about shaping perception. I adjusted my grip on the suitcase. Perception matters. She nodded, pleased with herself. Exactly. At the lodging entrance, I set the bags down just inside the door. She didn't thank me. Instead, she leaned in slightly. Listen, when people ask how we know each other, keep it professional. I don't need confusion about family dynamics. Understood. And don't come around my office unless you're called. I can't have you making me look small. I almost laughed at that. She checked her reflection in the glass door, smoothing her sleeve again. You really should have tried harder with your career, she said. You had potential. I stepped back. Good luck with your meeting. She adjusted her sunglasses. Oh, I won't need luck. She walked off toward Building 3. I watched her go. Behind her, 2 captains standing near the entrance straightened slightly as she approached. She lifted her chin, assuming the posture was for her. It wasn't. They were looking past her. I didn't hold their gaze long enough for it to register. Back in the yard, I returned to the container. I pulled out my phone and opened a secure note file. Date, time, location. I logged the interaction. Unauthorized tasking of personnel outside chain of command. Implied misuse of rank for personal service. Pattern of behavior consistent with prior documented arrogance. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. Just facts. because facts are heavier than luggage. Later that afternoon, I received the internal notification that her financial disclosures were still under review. Secondary audit triggered. Fort Sterling doesn't care about shine. It cares about numbers lining up. As the sun started dropping, I finished my inspection and handed off the clipboard to the civilian contractor overseeing the yard. He nodded respectfully. "Everything clear, ma'am, for now." I walked toward the command building through a side entrance that most personnel never used. No signage, keycard access only. Inside, the hallways were quiet. No decorations, no framed mission statements, just secured doors and people who understood discretion. In my office, I removed the reflective vest and placed it neatly on the chair. Then I pulled up the live personnel feed. Lieutenant Felicia Hayes had completed in processing. Access level limited pending clearance confirmation. She had no idea how temporary everything around her was. Earlier, she'd called me a janitor. That was fine. Someone has to take out the trash. And sometimes the trash takes itself out. I approved the internal monitoring request before her first weekly briefing. Fort Sterling runs on quiet pressure. No one yells, no one grandstands. If something is wrong, it simply doesn't move forward. Felicia tried to move everything forward at once. Within days, her social media presence shifted. Photos inside controlled spaces, captions about strategic impact. She positioned herself in front of briefing screens that displayed nothing classified, but looked impressive to anyone outside the gate. She pushed her junior enlisted hard. I saw it in the personnel notes first. 2 specialists requested reassignment from her section within 10 days. One cited excessive non-mission tasking. Another mentioned image-driven directives. That was polite language. In reality, she had them staging background shots, reformatting press drafts that didn't exist yet, rehearsing talking points for meetings she hadn't been invited to. She wanted visibility. Fort Sterling doesn't reward that. Her first budget request came through my desk under routine allocation review. It was labeled as Communications Infrastructure Enhancement. I opened it. New camera systems, lighting kits, editing hardware far beyond operational need. Justification, elevated base representation in strategic media channels. Denied. Digital signature applied Commander C. The system automatically routed the denial back to her section. 2 hours later, a revised submission came in. Smaller numbers. Same purpose. Denied. Commander C, I didn't need to say anything. The signature said enough. She tried a third time under a different cost code. Denied. By the end of the week, she requested a clarification meeting with senior command. It was declined. Standard response: submit revised documentation in compliance with operational necessity guidelines. I watched her through the internal review logs, not cameras. I don't need cameras. People document themselves when they're frustrated. She started staying later, sending sharper emails, CCing officers who had no role in the process. Then she made a mistake. She assumed the warehouse was the weak link. From her perspective, I was still the inventory officer, the person who checked boxes and logged serial numbers. If equipment left the yard, it must pass through someone like me. She cornered a sergeant from supply outside Building 4. I need expedited release on electronics batch 17C, she said. Ma'am, that batch is restricted, he replied. It's for authorized communications use. I'll need a signed release from the asset manager. She smiled tightly. I'll handle that. That conversation hit my desk within the hour. Not because anyone was tattling. Because Fort Sterling logs unusual pull requests automatically. Batch 17C contains specialized microcomponents, not weapons, not classified tech, but traceable, expensive, controlled. 2 days later, a release authorization came through, signed by Warehouse Asset Control. The name listed wasn't mine, but the signature block carried a familiar style. She'd practiced it. She'd watched me sign things her whole life without realizing what I was signing. The forged document cleared one container, small enough to avoid attention on a casual review, big enough to convert into cash if you knew the right secondary market. I didn't stop it, not yet. Instead, I triggered an internal trace. GPS markers embedded in packaging. Inventory variance alert scheduled for 48 hours post-release. Felicia moved fast. She arranged a community outreach event off base, claimed she needed demonstration equipment for a presentation to a local tech partner. There was no official partner. There was, however, a private buyer 2 counties over who specialized in surplus reselling. I saw the vehicle log when the components left the gate, signed out under her authority. No one questioned a first lieutenant in dress uniform carrying authorized paperwork. Perception works both ways. That night she called our parents. I know because my mother called me right after. Your sister is under a lot of pressure, she said. Fort Sterling is competitive. I'm sure it is. She says some of her funding keeps getting blocked by someone called Commander C. I let that sit. Do you know who that is? Mom asked. I do. Well, maybe you could talk to them. Put in a good word. I don't think that's necessary. There was silence on the line. Felicia says people are trying to hold her back. Maybe they're asking for accountability. Mom didn't respond to that. 2 days later, the internal variance report triggered. Missing components flagged. Forgery detected under signature comparison. Distribution path traced. And then came the line that sealed it. Intercepted audio from her office recorded as part of standard compliance monitoring in sensitive zones. She was speaking to one of her junior enlisted. Don't worry, she said casually. If anything comes up, it'll fall on supply. My sister works down there. She signs half the releases anyway. Pause. And even if it traces back to her, who's going to believe a warehouse grunt over me? Have you seen her boots? There was light laughter in the background. I listened to that clip once. Then I saved it. Not because it hurt, but because it clarified. This wasn't desperation alone. It was calculation layered on entitlement. She truly believed image outweighed record. Rank outweighed fact. Shine outweighed substance. The formal investigation packet assembled itself in less than 72 hours. Forgery of official documentation. Unauthorized transfer of restricted military components. Intent to distribute for personal financial gain. Chain of command abuse. Each charge backed by digital trail access logs financial tracing. I reviewed every page personally. No exaggeration, no assumptions, just evidence. The draft recommendation included immediate suspension pending court-martial review, termination of security clearance, possible dismissal. Before it could move forward, one final authorization was required. Commander C. I leaned back in my chair and stared at her personnel file. 12 years of spotlight. 3 weeks at Fort Sterling. 1 forged signature. 1 assumption too many. She thought she'd written a clever script. What she didn't realize was that Fort Sterling doesn't run on scripts. It runs on records. And records don't care how polished your boots are. I drove to my parents' house after reading the foreclosure notice myself. The bank had moved faster than expected. The startup Felicia invested in had collapsed quietly. No product, no payout, just a press release about restructuring and a locked website. The lien converted into default. The house was scheduled for seizure within 30 days. My mother's voice on the phone had been tight. We need to talk, all of us. So I showed up in uniform, not the reflective vest, not field gear, dress blues. I didn't do it for drama. I did it because I was coming straight from a command briefing, and I wasn't going to change clothes for a conversation built on denial. Felicia was already there when I arrived. Civilian clothes this time, no shine, no camera angles. She stood in the living room like she was preparing a defense statement. Dad sat in his usual chair, holding a letter with both hands. Mom paced between the kitchen and the hallway. This is because of her, Felicia said before I even closed the door. I set my cover on the entry table. Good evening to you too. She's under investigation, Felicia continued, pointing at me. Supply division, missing components. I tried to shield her from it. I didn't react. Dad looked confused. Cassie, is that true? Felicia stepped forward. She works in the warehouse. There were discrepancies. I warned her to be careful, but she wouldn't listen. That's not accurate, I said calmly. Oh really, she shot back. Then why are MPs sniffing around your section? Mom looked like she wanted someone to make it simple. We're about to lose this house. The bank says the loan defaulted. They're saying there's no recovery plan. Felicia folded her arms. If Cassie hadn't messed up at work, I wouldn't have had to shift funds to cover certain gaps. I let that hang for a second. You mortgaged this house, I said evenly, without telling them. It was temporary. It defaulted. Because my accounts are frozen, she snapped. Because someone flagged my budget authority. Because someone is sabotaging me. Dad looked between us. What accounts? What's frozen? Felicia exhaled hard, like we were all too slow to keep up. There's a misunderstanding at work. Internal politics. I moved some equipment for a communications project. Now they're acting like I committed a crime. You forged documentation, I said. She laughed once sharp. Prove it. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Firm, official. Dad stiffened. Felicia's eyes widened slightly, then she recovered fast. That's probably about her. She walked to the door and opened it with confidence. 2 military police officers stood on the porch. Dress uniform, no weapons drawn, calm posture. Yes, Felicia asked. Is Lieutenant Felicia Hayes present? One of them asked. She didn't hesitate. She pointed over her shoulder at me. She's the one you want, she said. Cassie Hayes, Supply Division. She's been under review for asset loss. The MP's gaze shifted past her and landed on me. He stepped inside, removed his cover, and came to attention. Ma'am. Felicia blinked. The MP gave a crisp nod. Major Hayes. The room went silent. Felicia's hand was still half raised, finger angled in my direction. Dad slowly stood up. Mom stopped pacing. Felicia turned her head toward me, confusion breaking through for the first time. Major, I met the MP's eyes. Status. Internal investigation file complete, ma'am. Evidence packet finalized. Forgery confirmed. Unauthorized transfer verified. Financial motive established. He held out a sealed folder. We require your final authorization signature to execute the arrest order for Lieutenant Felicia Hayes on charges of fraud, misuse of government property, and falsification of official documents. No one moved. Felicia stared at me like I had switched languages. This is a joke, she said quietly. I took the folder from the MP and opened it. Inside were copies of the forged release forms, signature comparison overlays, access logs, vehicle tracking data, audio transcript from her office. She saw the top page and her face drained of color. That's not, she started. It is, I replied. Mom looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Major Dad's voice was low. Since when? 12 years ago, I said. After OCS, then command track, then regional oversight. Felicia shook her head slowly. No, you work inventory. I oversee strategic assets for this region, I corrected, including Fort Sterling. The room felt smaller. You denied my budgets, she said, voice cracking. Commander C, yes. Her breathing changed. Faster now. You set me up. I reviewed your submissions. I flagged irregularities. You made your own decisions. She took a step back. You knew I was under pressure. I knew you forged my name. Dad looked at her. You forged her name. Felicia's eyes darted around the room, looking for someone to anchor to. I was going to fix it. I just needed time. You already used time, I said. And their house. Mom sat down slowly on the couch. The MP waited silently. Felicia looked at him. You can't arrest me over paperwork. It's not paperwork, I said. It's federal property. She turned to me again, desperation replacing arrogance. You're my sister. Yes. Then fix this. I closed the folder. I already did. I pulled a separate document from my briefcase and handed it to Dad. Property transfer confirmation, I said. I purchased the outstanding debt on this house 3 weeks ago through a holding trust. The bank can't seize it. Dad's hands trembled as he read. Mom covered her mouth. Felicia stared at the page like it was written in code. You bought it, she whispered. I protected it. Her voice turned sharp again. So you planned all of this? No, I said calmly. You did. The MP cleared his throat slightly. Ma'am, we need authorization. I uncapped the pen from my uniform pocket. Felicia took one last step toward me. If you sign that, my career is over. I held her gaze. You ended it when you forged the document. She looked at my boots then. Polished tonight, regulation shine, no dust, no cracks, just standard issue. The same boots she mocked. I signed. The MP took the folder back and nodded once. Lieutenant Hayes, you are being placed under arrest pending court-martial review. Felicia didn't resist. She didn't say anything else either. For the first time in her life, there was no audience. I chose to attend the formal review in full dress uniform. Not for her, for the record. Fort Sterling's command building doesn't look impressive from the outside. Concrete, minimal windows, no banners. Inside, though, every hallway is controlled access. Every door requires clearance. Felicia arrived escorted by 2 MPS. She wasn't cuffed, not yet. Administrative custody, still a commissioned officer pending formal charges. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled this time, boots still polished. She held her chin high, but the angle wasn't as steady as it used to be. I stepped out of my office as they brought her down the main corridor. That hallway has a particular rhythm. When a senior officer walks through, conversations stop. Chairs shift, people stand. The first salute came from a major near the operations room. Felicia straightened automatically. She assumed it was for her. Then another officer snapped to attention. Then another. She walked a little taller. Until she noticed something. Their eyes weren't on her. They were focused just over her shoulder. I was 5 steps behind her. Full dress blues. Major insignia clear. Ribbons aligned. Decorations I had never posted, never mentioned, never framed in my parents' house. The hallway grew quieter as we moved. Felicia slowed slightly. An officer called out, "Good morning, ma'am." She started to respond. "Good morning," I answered. The officer's salute was precise. Felicia's steps faltered for half a second. She didn't turn around immediately. Pride is stubborn. When she finally did, her expression shifted from irritation to confusion. "What are you wearing?" she asked under her breath. "Uniform." She looked me up and down. "That's not yours, it is." Her escort stopped outside the main command conference room. The doors were heavy, frosted glass, no labels. An MP opened one. Inside the room was already set. Senior officers seated along both sides of a long table. Legal counsel present, recorders on. At the far end stood General Marcus Sterling. He doesn't waste time on theatrics. Tall, direct, no unnecessary words. Felicia's posture stiffened when she saw him. She whispered quickly, "You rented that, didn't you?" I didn't answer. General Sterling stepped forward. "Major Hayes," he said, extending his hand. I shook it once, firm, professional. "Thank you for compiling the review so efficiently," he added. "Of course, sir." Felicia stared at us like she'd missed a briefing. The general glanced at her briefly, then back to me. "As always, you're the brain behind the space." He says that when he wants to remind the room where authority actually sits. Felicia let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is insane." No one reacted. The MPs guided her to the designated chair opposite mine. She leaned forward immediately. "Sir, with respect, there's been a misunderstanding." General Sterling didn't sit yet. "You'll have an opportunity to speak." She pointed toward me. "She has manipulated this process. She works in warehouse control." I folded my hands on the table. "I oversee strategic asset command for this region," I said evenly, "including Fort Sterling." Felicia shook her head. No, you don't." One of the legal officers slid a personnel file across the table toward her. Official record, commission date, promotions, command assignments, clearance levels. Her eyes moved quickly over the page. Her breathing changed again. "That's not possible," she said quietly. "It is," I replied. General Sterling took his seat. "Lieutenant Hayes," he began. "You are here to respond to charges of falsifying official documentation, unauthorized transfer of restricted equipment, and financial misconduct tied to personal debt." I was under pressure, she said quickly. "Budget constraints, political pushback." "Did you forge a release authorization?" the general asked. She hesitated. "That's a yes or no question," he added. Her jaw tightened. "I adjusted documentation to meet operational need." "You forged a signature," I said. She turned to me sharply. "You set impossible barriers. I required proper justification. You blocked every submission, because none of them met criteria." Her hands gripped the edge of the table. "You've always done this, always hidden behind rules. I enforced them." Silence settled over the room. The general nodded toward me. "Major, please summarize the investigative findings for the record." I stood. No speech prepared. No dramatic tone. "On review of asset movement logs, Batch 17C was released under falsified authorization," I began. "Signature comparison confirms discrepancy. GPS tracking verified off-base diversion. Financial tracing indicates attempted resale through private intermediary. Audio documentation confirms intent to redirect blame to warehouse division." Felicia looked at the table. I continued. "Additionally, Lieutenant Hayes failed to disclose significant personal debt during reassignment review, including a leveraged lien against private property." Her head snapped up. "That has nothing to do with this. It establishes motive," I replied. She leaned back in her chair, eyes unfocused now. For years, she had built herself around visibility, around applause, around perception. Fort Sterling doesn't care about any of that. It cares about records. General Sterling looked at her evenly. "Do you dispute the authenticity of the evidence presented?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "No, sir," she said finally. The room remained steady. No one gloated. No one whispered. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. She glanced at my uniform one more time. At the ribbons, the insignia, the quiet proof of a path she never bothered to understand. You could have told me, she said softly. You never asked, I answered. And that was the truth. I dimmed the lights and connected my tablet to the main screen. No music, no dramatic pauses, just data. The first image was security footage from the warehouse corridor, time-stamped, clear. Felicia entering after standard operating hours. No escort, no logged authorization for that time block. The next clip showed her at the access terminal. Badge swipe, code entry, door release. She watched the screen without blinking. That doesn't prove intent, she said quietly. It establishes access, I replied. I advanced the slide. A side-by-side comparison appeared. On the left, my verified digital signature from prior asset approvals. On the right, the forged authorization attached to batch 17C. Signature mapping software highlighted pressure inconsistencies, stroke hesitation, micro-angle deviation. It's close, I said. But not close enough. She swallowed. The next document filled the screen. Bank statements, private loan agreements, credit extensions, interest rates that bordered on predatory, total outstanding debt 6 figures. A separate document showed the lien placed on my parents' home, collateralized without full disclosure. Mom and Dad weren't in the room, but their names were. You leveraged their house to cover unsecured investment losses, I said. Without explaining the risk. Felicia's hands trembled slightly on the table. I was going to fix it, she whispered again. With what, I asked. Another loan. No answer. I moved to the final slide. Audio transcript. Her voice in black and white. If anything comes up, it'll fall on supply. My sister works down there. Who's going to believe a warehouse grunt over me? The room stayed quiet long enough for the words to sink in. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, the shine was gone. You could have warned me, she said. Not angry now, not sharp, just smaller. I did, I replied. Every denied request was a warning. She looked down at my boots. They were polished tonight. Regulation standard, no dust from the yard, no field dirt. But she remembered the ones from the restaurant. You made me look stupid, she said. You did that yourself. Her jaw tightened, but there was no fight left in it. I leaned forward slightly. You laughed at my boots because they were covered in dirt, I said. That dirt came from actual work. Long hours, hard decisions, quiet responsibility. I let that sit for a second. Your boots were polished because image mattered more than substance. You financed that image with debt. With Mom and Dad's house. With risk you never fully understood. Her breathing grew uneven. At least my dirt came from integrity, I continued. Your shine came from their blood pressure and unpaid bills. That landed. Her face lost the last of its color. She stared at the table, then back at me. You hate me, she said. No, I answered honestly. I hate what you chose. General Sterling remained silent at the head of the table. This wasn't his part. I reached into my folder again. There's one more document. I slid it across the table toward her. Property transfer record. Owner of Record Hayes, Strategic Holdings Trust. Beneficiary authority Cassie Hayes. She scanned it slowly. This is the house, she said. Yes, you said you paid the debt. I did. She looked up sharply. You put it in your name. Yes. Her voice rose slightly. So it's yours now. Yes. The words felt heavy, but clean. I structured it to prevent foreclosure, I continued. The bank has no claim. Mom and Dad can remain there indefinitely. She stared at the line that listed me as sole legal owner. You didn't tell them, she said. They know now. You took my inheritance. You put it at risk. Her hands started shaking again, but this time it wasn't anger. If I lose my commission, she said slowly, I lose retirement. I lose benefits. I lose everything. You lose consequences, I corrected. Her composure cracked. For the first time since we were kids, I saw fear without ego wrapped around it. You're really going to let them do this, she said. I'm not letting them, I replied. I'm not stopping them. She tried one last angle. Family matters more than regulations. Family should have mattered before you signed their house away. Silence settled again. She leaned back in her chair, shoulders slumping. So that's it, she said. I lose my career. I lose the house. I lose everything. You lose the version of yourself built on shortcuts, I said. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not here. The general finally spoke. Lieutenant Hayes, this board will forward its recommendation for formal court-martial proceedings. Pending that outcome, You are suspended from duty, effective immediately. She nodded once. No argument, no performance. The MPs stepped forward again. She stood slowly. Before they escorted her out, she looked at me one last time. You always stood in my shadow, she said quietly. I held her gaze. No, I replied. I stood where the light wasn't. She didn't respond. The door closed behind her. The screen still displayed the final document, ownership confirmed. I disconnected the tablet and the lights came back up. The room returned to neutral. No applause, no dramatic speeches, just the end of one illusion, and the beginning of consequences she had never planned for. I signed the final separation paperwork 3 weeks later. The court-martial moved fast. The evidence was clean, no gray areas, no procedural errors. Felicia accepted a plea to avoid extended confinement, dismissal, loss of rank, loss of benefits. Just like that, the uniform she treated like a stage costume was gone. Fort Sterling adjusted without drama. Her name came off the roster. Access revoked. Email deactivated. The system doesn't hold grudges, it just updates. My parents asked to see me 2 days after the verdict. They didn't come to base. They asked me to meet them at the house, my house. I parked in the same driveway I'd grown up in. Same cracked concrete near the garage. Same mailbox leaning slightly to the left. Mom opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered. Dad stayed seated at the dining table. He didn't stand this time. We need to talk, Mom said softly. I stepped inside but didn't remove my cover. They both knew why they were there. Felicia called, Mom began. She's not supposed to, I said. She used a friend's phone. Of course she did. Dad cleared his throat. She's scared. She should be, I replied evenly. Mom winced at that. She made mistakes, Dad said. But she's still our daughter. She's my sister, I said. That didn't stop her. Mom sat across from me. You could have reduced the charges. No, you're her commanding officer. I was. Dad leaned forward. Family should come first. I reached into my briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table. What's that, Mom asked. Documentation. I opened it and slid the first page toward them. A list, numbered, 1 through 47, each line a date. Each line a sentence. Dad adjusted his glasses. What is this? He asked quietly. 47 times I said you compared us and chose her. They didn't speak. I continued. June 12th. Why can't you be more like your sister? Mom's lips pressed together. September 3rd. Felicia has leadership presence. You're better behind the scenes. Dad looked down. Graduation dinner. Felicia represents this family well. Silence thickened. I kept records, I said. Not because I needed proof, because I needed clarity. Mom's voice shook. We were proud of her. I know. And you were always so independent, Dad added weakly. That wasn't independence, I replied. That was adaptation. They both sat there absorbing that. She's lost everything, Mom whispered. No, I said calmly. She lost privileges. She still has choices. Dad rubbed his forehead. She asked if we could help her financially. I let that sit for a second. No. Mom looked up sharply. Cassie, no, I repeated. The house stays in my name. You live here. No rent. No conditions except one. They waited. You don't send her money. You don't co-sign loans. You don't mortgage this property again. And you don't undermine the consequences she earned. Mom's eyes filled. You're asking us to choose. I'm asking you to stop choosing wrong. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Dad stared at the list again. We didn't realize, he said quietly. You didn't want to. The room went still. For the first time, there was no comparison in the air. No spotlight, no ranking, just facts. I don't hate her, I said. But I won't rescue her from herself. Mom nodded slowly. Dad folded the list carefully and slid it back toward me. You've always been stronger than we gave you credit for, he said. I didn't need credit, I replied. I needed fairness. No one argued that. I stood. Mom hesitated. Will you visit? Yes, I said. On my terms. Dad looked at my uniform. We didn't know, he said again. That's part of the problem, I answered. I left the house without anger. Just clarity. 2 weeks later, I walked across the military airfield at dawn. Deployment orders. Short-term oversight assignment overseas. Strategic assets don't manage themselves. The sky was clear. No cameras, no audience. I stopped near the edge of the tarmac and looked down at my boots. The same pair from that anniversary dinner. I had them cleaned, conditioned, properly polished. Not to impress anyone, just because details matter. The leather reflected the early morning sun, not blinding, just steady. A young lieutenant passed by and saluted. "Morning, ma'am, morning," I replied. No one here knew about family dinners, or foreclosure notices, or whispered insults over steak and wine. They knew rank, responsibility, record. I adjusted my gloves and walked toward the aircraft. For 12 years, I let her think I was behind her. In reality, I was building something she never bothered to look at. Integrity doesn't trend, it doesn't photograph well, it doesn't shout, it just holds. And when the spotlight burns out, that's what's left. I stepped onto the aircraft without looking back. The door closed, engines started. And for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to prove. I didn't feel victorious when everything settled. That surprised me. For years, I thought if the truth ever came out, it would feel like fireworks, like vindication, like the universe finally correcting a long-standing error. It didn't. It felt quiet. After the court-martial wrapped and the paperwork cleared, life didn't explode into applause. I still had early briefings, still had asset reviews, still had reports that needed signatures. The world didn't pause to congratulate integrity. And that's the first thing I want you to understand. If you're waiting for justice to feel dramatic, you're going to miss it. Justice is usually paperwork. It's consistency. It's saying no when it would be easier to say yes. For a long time, I thought my story was about sibling rivalry, about favoritism, about proving something. It wasn't. It was about standards. Felicia didn't fall because I exposed her. She fell because she built her life on leverage instead of structure. There's a difference. Leverage looks impressive. Fast growth, fast access, fast approval. Structure is slower, it's boring. It's systems and accountability and long-term planning. Leverage gets attention. Structure survives audits. A lot of people watching this are high achievers. You work hard, you keep your head down, you don't always get credit. And sometimes you watch someone else climb faster, using confidence networking image. Here's the uncomfortable truth: shortcuts often look like talent in the beginning, until they're tested. If your life can't survive scrutiny, it's not stable. It's staged. That applies to money too. Felicia didn't collapse because of one forged document. She collapsed because she normalized financial denial, lifestyle inflation, borrowing against future promotions, treating projected income like guaranteed income. I've seen that pattern outside the military more times than I can count. People upgrade their lives based on what they think they're about to earn, then panic when reality catches up. If you need debt to maintain your image is already lying. There's nothing wrong with ambition. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. But you don't mortgage stability for ego. And you definitely don't gamble with someone else's security to fund your own narrative. The house wasn't about real estate. It was about responsibility. When I bought that debt, I didn't do it to win. I did it because someone in that family had to think 5 years ahead instead of 5 minutes. That's what maturity looks like. Not louder opinions, not shinier boots, long-term thinking. Another thing people misunderstand is boundaries. When I refused to intervene for her, some people called it cold. It wasn't cold, it was clean. There's a difference between forgiveness and interference. You can forgive someone and still let them experience consequences. You can love someone and still say no. If your compassion eliminates accountability, you're not helping. You're enabling. A lot of families confuse loyalty with rescue. Rescuing someone from the result of their own behavior doesn't fix them. It just postpones collapse. And collapse always comes back bigger. If you're the responsible one in your family, listen carefully. You are not required to absorb the fallout of other people's decisions. You are not obligated to fund dysfunction. You are not disloyal for protecting your peace. That lesson took me years to learn. For a long time, I thought staying quiet was strength. Sometimes it is, but silence without boundaries turns into self-erasure. I had to stop proving my worth through endurance. I had to stop accepting comparison as normal. 47 times they diminished me. 47 times I adapted instead of addressing it. That part was on me. Growth doesn't mean becoming harder. It means becoming clearer. Clear about your value. Clear about your limits. Clear about what you will and won't carry. People often ask what the real power was. Was it the rank? Was it the authority to sign the arrest order? No. The real power was discipline. It was choosing not to compete publicly. It was choosing not to retaliate emotionally. It was choosing documentation over drama. It was choosing long-term credibility over short-term validation. Rank amplified it. But rank didn't create it. You don't need a title to live that way. You need standards. If you build your life around truth, you don't have to chase exposure. Exposure finds what's unstable. Truth survives it. When I walked across that airfield and looked down at my boots, they weren't symbols of revenge. They were reminders. Work quietly, document carefully, spend wisely, love responsibly, and never confuse shine for strength. You don't win by humiliating someone who underestimated you. You win by becoming unshakable. And when the noise fades, because it always does, what remains is your record. Make sure it's solid. I didn't talk to Felicia for 6 months after the court-martial. Not because I was angry, because I was done negotiating with reality. People assume the hardest part of a situation like this is exposure, the confrontation, the public unraveling. It's not. The hardest part is what comes after. The quiet. The space where you're no longer reacting, no longer defending, no longer proving, just living. I went back to work. I deployed. I handled operations that had nothing to do with family drama. The system moved forward like it always does, but something inside me shifted. For most of my life, I was the dependable one, the stable one, the one who didn't need as much. That label sounds like a compliment until you realize it's often an excuse people use to give you less. Less protection, less praise, less empathy. If that's you, I need you to hear this clearly. Being strong does not mean being invisible. You don't get extra credit for suffering quietly, and you are not obligated to stay small so someone else can feel exceptional. I spent years thinking my role was to support the family image, to smooth things over, to not compete, to not challenge the narrative. That wasn't humility, it was avoidance. Real confidence doesn't hide, it just doesn't beg. There's a difference. Felicia chased validation like it was oxygen. Every room was a stage, every interaction was branding. And I let that contrast define us. She was visible, I was useful. Here's what I eventually understood: usefulness scales. Visibility fluctuates. If you build skills, discipline, and integrity, your value compounds even when no one is watching. If you build attention, it peaks and crashes. I didn't need my parents to finally admit I had accomplished something. I needed to stop measuring myself by whether they saw it. That's freedom. When you stop performing for approval, you get your energy back. You stop explaining, you stop competing, you stop resenting, and you start building quietly, intentionally on your own terms. A lot of you watching this are waiting for someone to acknowledge what you've done, your boss, your parents, your partner. You want them to finally say, "I was wrong about you." Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. Your stability cannot depend on that sentence. Because if your confidence requires applause, it's fragile. The moment that applause stops, so does your identity. After everything happened, people asked if I regretted exposing her. I didn't expose her, I enforced standards. That distinction matters. If your response to wrongdoing is based on revenge, it will hollow you out. If your response is based on principle, it will strengthen you. I didn't act because she embarrassed me. I acted because she crossed a line. Lines are important. Without them, relationships turn into negotiations, and negotiations turn into quiet resentments. Boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about clarity. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Some people will only respect you after you stop accommodating them. They don't adjust when you explain your value. They adjust when you enforce it. That doesn't mean you become cruel. It means you become consistent. Consistency is intimidating to people who rely on flexibility to get away with things. If you're the one who always bends, ask yourself why. Is it kindness or is it fear of conflict? I avoided conflict for years because I didn't want to fracture the family dynamic. The family dynamic fractured anyway. The difference was this time it fractured around truth. And truth is easier to live with than illusion. I don't hate my sister. I don't even hate the version of her that underestimated me. But I don't shrink for her anymore. That's growth. And growth isn't loud, it's steady. When I look back at that anniversary dinner, I don't remember the insult as clearly as I remember my own silence. Not the silence of weakness, the silence of patience. I knew who I was even when she didn't. That's the part I'm proud of. Not the arrest, not the reveal, the restraint, the preparation, the discipline to let someone show you exactly who they are without interrupting the process. If someone underestimates you, let them. Underestimation is an advantage. It gives you room to move without interference. It gives you time to build without competition. It gives you clarity about who actually pays attention to substance. But don't confuse being underestimated with being unseen. You see yourself. That's enough. The day I stopped trying to be recognized as better was the day I became untouchable, because I wasn't playing that game anymore. If you're watching this and you feel like the quiet sibling, the overlooked employee, the one who carries more than you're credited for, I want you to shift your focus. Stop trying to prove. Start trying to prepare. Stop arguing about perception. Start reinforcing structure. Stop resenting their shine. Start investing in your foundation. You don't need to embarrass someone to outgrow them. You just need to stop aligning your worth with their opinion. In the end, the boots were never the point. The point was this. When the lights come on and everything is examined, will your life hold up? If the answer is yes, you don't need revenge. You don't need applause. You don't need to win publicly. You just need to remain solid. And solid people don't crack under scrutiny. They endure it. That's the difference between shine and strength. Choose strength.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.